Good afternoon. I'm Larry Lewis with Smart Training, and welcome to the second part of our series on the hook, Managing Business Associates Effectively. Appreciate you taking your time out of your day to join us during the 12 o'clock hour. And our presenter today is Jim Moore. We're actually going to be taking a look at not only the constant drip, drip, drip of data breaches that continue to go on every day, but how to actually deal with the vendors that may be having complications and putting your PHI at risk. Jim Moore, who is actually, as I said, is going to be our presenter today. Jim is one of the elder statesmen in the training industry, and during the more than 30 years of development in the industry, he's done training for Success Motivation International, Leadership Management, Inc., as well as Smart Training, which he joined in 2000. Over the last 14 years, Jim has produced nearly 100 of Smart Training's OSHA and HIPAA compliance training modules, and he's a certified HIPAA professional and consults with medical and dental practices across the country. Jim also is a political science and philosophy major from Arkansas University. He's a best-selling author of 10 books and has appeared on more than 700 radio and television programs ranging from Larry King to CBS Evening News. Jim's going to have quite a bit of information, and hopefully you'll have quite a few takeaways from it this afternoon. And without further ado, Jim, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks, Larry, and good afternoon, everybody. We certainly appreciate you taking your lunch hour to spend on our webinar, and as Larry mentioned, certainly hope that something that we impart this afternoon will have a lasting takeaway value for you. Every week or so, when I'm feeling particularly masochistic, I go out and I do cold calls on medical and dental practices. And presenting myself as a certified HIPAA professional, I typically get one of two responses. The majority of medical practices will tell me, oh, we've got that covered. And the majority of dental practices will tell me, we don't pay a lot of attention to that HIPAA stuff. Well, the latter response makes me shake in my boots because I have a very good idea what they're up against if they don't pay a lot of attention to patient privacy. And the former response is almost always a lie, because I watched Sean Tuma's webinar last week and it scared me to death, and I'm a HIPAA professional, so if it scared me to death, imagine the effect it probably had on those of you who were watching and have to deal with patient privacy as part of your job. If you weren't rushing to make sure that every device in your office was encrypted after that webinar, you probably don't have a pulse, or at least that's my best guess. But today we're going to be looking at the nuts and bolts of the business associate paradigm, understanding how business associates function from a contractual perspective as someone who handles your PHI, and more importantly, understanding all the things that you need to have in place with business associates to make sure that you are not on the hook. And we begin with a definition of a business associate. We also talk about the requirements for business associates, because there are some particular lynch posts or mile markers that will define a business associate for us. Then we'll discuss the point of the hook, the point of all of this 3-week webinar series. We'll talk about the penalties for violations, audits, remediation, and good faith effort, and how good faith effort can play a part in the remediation process. Action steps that are designed to help you get off the hook now. And finally, amending your business associate agreements to comply with the Omnibus Rule. As most of you are aware, the Omnibus Rule did set forth some new characteristics for business associate agreements. The problem is that most covered entities have not changed their BAAs to comply. So we're going to go down all 8 compliance hallmarks with respect to BAAs and the Omnibus Rule, and by the end of that time you should have a good idea what needs to be changed in your existing business associate agreements. But let's go back to the very start. Let's go back to the late 1990s and before the advent of high-tech, the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act, all the law required business associates to have were what the law referred to as appropriate safeguards. And obviously, you could take that just about any way you wanted to. That was the era of the predominantly paper chart office. Most of those charts were behind some sort of lock and key, and for a lot of folks, that comprised their appropriate safeguards. There was no standardized process for data protection back then because, in a very real sense, there wasn't a lot of patient data to protect, not as we know the meaning of the term now. Consequently, 15 years ago, there was no way to validate business associate performance. You couldn't really check to see if your business associates were providing appropriate safeguards for your PHI, because those appropriate safeguards tended to vary from BA to BA. And as a consequence, ePHI security, electronic data security, was very loosely defined. Those were what we euphemistically refer to at Smart Training as the good old days. And it's interesting to me to realize how far we've come in a very short period of time. The reason that the rules have changed is because those best intentions, and you have to assume that the laws back in the mid-90s were written with best intentions in mind, have led to worst-case scenarios. In many offices, there are very limited resources for IT and too many IT issues to handle, so patient privacy issues tend to get shuffled to the bottom of the deck. What's really driven the change in rules affecting business associates, however, has been the adoption of electronic medical records. That's been the real catalyst, and as such, it has made business associate and business associate agreement changes pretty much inevitable. There wasn't any way with a broad move to EMR adoption, which was promulgated in part by the government itself. As most of you know, there were tremendous incentives offered for becoming an early adopter of EMR. With those changes, however, some changes in the laws reflecting BAs and BAAs have been forced on us. We literally could not proceed without them. So let's talk for just a moment about what a business associate really is. A business associate acts on behalf of a covered entity, but they are not an employee of the covered entity. They perform or assist in performing any function or activity that involves the use or disclosure of PHI, and most importantly, they deal with individually identifiable PHI. Now, a number of confusions have sprung up regarding who can be a business associate and who cannot, and literally every week I'm called by a client who tells me that they have a business associate who refuses to sign a BAA because the business associate says they're a covered entity and as such they are covered. Well, guess what? That's not a valid excuse. The law very clearly states that a covered entity can also be a business associate, and if you buy into that, if you say, well, yeah, you're right, you're a covered entity, we don't need a BAA from you, then you are both on the hook in the event of a data breach or other incident. So the role of a business associate is very clearly defined, and more importantly than ever, business associates are now required to comply directly with the HIPAA security rule. That was not the case 15, 20 years ago, but now it is, and administrative, physical, and technical safeguards all have their place within a business associate's environment. Consequently, there's policy, procedure, and documentation required on the part of the business associate, not just on the part of the covered entity that's using the BA, and the business associate must designate a privacy officer. Now look at that bottom bullet point for just a moment, because it is deceptively simple. Must designate a privacy officer. That's true for anyone you maintain a business associate relationship with. Now just take a guess for me and tell me how many business associates do you suppose actually have a designated privacy officer? That figure is in the single digits. I would estimate at the moment that business associates with a business associate agreement in force that actually have a privacy officer are somewhere around 8 to 9%. And obviously that's going to have to increase. You're going to have a front why it should be, because that business associate, if they are norm, if they are 60%, that business associate is offering absolutely no HIPAA or patient privacy training to their staff. That's just a hard, cold statistic, and unfortunately it seems to be relatively non-moving. In other words, we haven't seen that change a great deal over the last couple of years. The third bullet point is perhaps just as important and should be even more frightening. More than 80% of business associates take no precautions with your PHI. In other words, they are not encrypting their devices. They're not ensuring that only their employees have access to them. They're not taking any safeguards with who accesses their internet. 80% of business associates are handling your PHI with all of the sensitivity of a road mender. And if that doesn't frighten you, then probably nothing will. The final bullet point is pretty obvious. The majority of existing business associate agreements are inadequate, and certainly as of next Monday, most will be. If you have BAAs that already exist, odds are that by next Monday they will be obsolete and out of date. And this is the point of greatest conflict that I have with a lot of dental and some medical practices. Getting this point across, this is a real challenge, because what it means, and I've been working in medical and dental environments for 30 years now, and I know that this is anathema to, in particular, a lot of dental practices. What it means is that you are going to be compelled to spend some money to actually upgrade your BAAs and ensure that your business associates are taking adequate precautions with your PHI. You can't skate by any longer with the templates on the DHHS website, because those templates are now out of date, or will be come Monday morning. So there's work to be done here, but it has to be done by someone who knows what they're doing. And obviously, in most practices, that's the privacy officer, who in any case may still need some assistance. I'm going to take a sip of my Diet Coke here. I didn't want you to think I was drinking vodka or something, Larry.
It's after 12 o'clock, Jim. So.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it is middle of the week, too, so there you go. So let's talk for just a moment about business associate requirements. What is required of a business associate? Well, obviously you have to provide some accounting for disclosures and audit trails. You have to protect that all-important patient data. You have to provide for proper data disposal at the end of a business associate agreement. In other words, once that agreement times out, you've got to be able to dispose of that data correctly. You don't just leave it on a hard drive or a copier and intend for the next person who uses that particular machine to come across it. It's got to be disposed of properly. And you've got to provide, if you're a business associate, privacy and security measures that include training. So if you don't provide the privacy and security measures that include training, if you don't provide any training at all, and again, 60% of business associates do not, then you violated the requirements from the start. That means that you've got to provide, as a business associate, mandatory HIPAA training for all employees. You've got to have a monitored security system. Make sure that, for example, your server is properly secured, your building is secured, that no one can just walk in and have access to your equipment or your PHI. You've got to provide automated data backups that are properly stored. And incidentally, properly stored does not mean that you rotate hard drives between personnel and everybody takes a hard drive home one different night of the week, because odds are those hard drives are not going to be properly encrypted. And when they are left sitting on the seat of a car and they get stolen, guess what? You've got a data breach that could number literally into the hundreds of thousands of patients. You've also got to provide automated virus checks of your equipment, and you've got to have employee termination security procedures. I remember talking with a particular provider in Central Texas not too terribly long ago. They haven't changed their password for their local Wi-Fi network for the last year and a half, and yet they terminated people right and left, as large practices are wont to do, but they didn't understand that now their network password was floating all over the city as a result. So those employee termination security procedures have to include some way to update your security process. In the event that you terminate someone today, that process is going to have to change as a result. Most business associates, as we've already seen, the larger majority of business associates are not bothering with any of these things. The subcontractors who work for business associates have to comply with the same restrictions and conditions as business associates. The middle bullet point here is the key. Subcontractors dramatically increase the probability of data breach. Now, Larry, we already said that that probability was at 94% with business associates. Subcontractors working for business associates make data breach almost inevitable. And down at the bottom of the screen, the final bullet point, we ask the question, why? Well, we can answer that in three short sentences. There's no training, there's no concern, there's no proactive care for PHI. Those are the risks of business associates using subcontractors. Now, here's the point of all of this. Here's where the hook lies. The majority of covered entities don't have business associate agreements in place, so they are equally at risk with business associates. Most business associates, and we've already seen 60%, are not training their employees. That means the data that you are sharing between your covered entity and your business associate is at risk for flagrant misuse, theft, and stupidity. And we watched Sean Tuma talking last week about the inordinately high dollar figures that are being paid for patient files. If you think that just because you're in a small Texas town, that renders you bulletproof with respect to PHI theft, you really need to rethink that attitude. Without the BAA in place, both you and the business associate are liable, and the penalties that are associated with data breaches can effectively shutter your practice. The question at the bottom of the screen, are you prepared for the worst case scenario? In the large majority of cases, in 88% of the practices that I walk into, the answer to that question is a resounding no. They are not prepared to encounter that worst case scenario. That's where the real hook lies. That's where the problem lies. That's why you and your practice may well be at risk. I drink Diet Coke because it's a Southern product. For those of you who didn't realize that, it was actually invented in Atlanta, which makes it already something of esteem in my regard.
I would have thought, being a Texan, you would have gone Dr. Pepper, but silly me.
And particularly with as much time as I spent in Waco, that would be a logical assumption. But I had to give Dr. Pepper up several years ago. It did not agree with the lining of my stomach for some reason. So here we're talking about the violations, the penalties that can occur if something does happen with respect to your data. This is what I call the silver hook. This is the only going to cost us 25 grand this year sort of violation. Your employee did not know and would not have known with reasonable diligence that what he or she did would have created a data breach. The penalty is only $100 per violation. The annum cap is $25,000. You can shrug your shoulders with this one. You can walk away and say, no big deal. We've learned a lesson. We'll live to fight another day. The golden hook, the next step up, reasonable cause to know. That means if your employees have been training on HIPAA and patient privacy, they have reasonable cause to know that what they've done would create a data breach. It excludes willful neglect. In other words, you can't just ignore the policies and procedures, the security and administrative functions, and assume that you're not going to get caught on willful neglect, because you will. It's $1,000 per violation for this particular level and $100,000 per annum cap, which again is survivable by the vast majority of practices. So again, no big deal. The platinum stringer, this is where they really have you strung up, willful neglect. Even if you correct it, it's $10,000 per violation and $250,000 per year as a cap. This is the point at which you have to ask yourself, can we afford to let this stuff go untouched? And we're going to talk in just a moment about the propensity of the government to actually begin auditing practices this year and early next year, and you'll see why these come into play. This is what I euphemistically refer to as the platinum stringer, because once you're strung up at that $250,000 per annum cap, you're going to know it. And at that $10,000 per violation rate, again, it's going to cause some hardship in almost any size practice, with the exception of a fairly medium-sized or large hospital. Now, filleted and fried is the title of the slide here. This is a violation that is willful neglect. You obviously knew about it and did nothing. You did nothing to correct it. It's $50,000 per violation, and $1,500,000 per year is the cap. So this is the point that's going to affect even the larger covered entities, and you can't afford to stack up too terribly many of those before they begin to make themselves felt. Now, if you look across the broad spectrum of practices that we consult with, what I can tell you is that 88% of practices will fall into this fourth category. So the odds are, of the folks that we've got on the webinar today, 8 of you should be very concerned about fitting into this final notch here. And if you're not concerned by it now, believe me, you will be. And here's the reason why. Audits are forthcoming. Health and Human Services has already promised to have a permanent HIPAA audit structure in place by the end of this year. Now, even if you assume they don't actually get out and start auditing practices until sometime in, say, mid-2015, that still means that you've got to be prepared for a site visit and an audit report. They're going to interview your stakeholders. They're going to take a look at your physical security features, your physical safeguards. They're going to examine your daily operations and your policy compliance. That is all forthcoming, courtesy of the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, it's important to note that this time around they are not looking to a third-party vendor like KPMG to actually construct these audits and go out and perform them. They'll actually be performed by the department itself, and I think we're going to all look back on the KPMG audit days as the good old days. What KPMG did, they were the contractor of choice for the HHS audit process during 2012. What they did was to develop an audit platform. They automated the process more or less so that HHS could come waltzing into your practice and spend a day and complete a site visit and an audit report and issue a fine or a penalty on the spot. That's what's headed down the road here. The government's promising it by the end of the year this year. My suspicion is that it will actually come into play middle of the year next year, but in any case, if you're not ready, the good old days of being able to cavalierly ignore patient privacy are going to be gone forever. The folks that I cold call who say, we don't worry too much about that HIPAA stuff, believe me, by the middle of next year, they will be. It's not a foregone conclusion, it's fact. And unfortunately, KPMG has paved the way here. They've shown the government how to do it. They've given the government the structure of actually putting it into place. And what we're going to see is a massive uptake in the number of audits during 2015. The odds are they're not going to begin focusing on the small 1 and 2 professional practices, but the practices that involve more than 2 or 3 practicing professionals will be targets, and certainly larger practices will be. Hospitals and larger facilities will be, and as a consequence, everybody needs to be on alert that this is what's coming down the pike here, middle of 2015. So while we will talk later in the presentation about Monday being the deadline to update your business associate agreements, in my view, you've really got another 6 months before you'll be called to account. It gives you a little time to sit back and focus, but some of these egregious things that your business associates are getting away with on a daily basis, you want to find a way to put a stop to sooner rather than later. Let me just mention one thing very quickly. I walked into, and Larry knows this story, I walked into a nursing home a couple of months back, had an appointment with the administrator, and I was about 7-8 minutes early, as I am wont to be. And I decided to make good use of that time, so I headed to the restroom. And there in the restroom, on top of the trash, was a hard copy of that day's facility census, containing the name, social security number, all the insurance information, address, date of birth, etc., for every single patient in the nursing home. So I just picked that up and I walked into my meeting with the administrator, who promptly accused me of trying to scare her. Now, she was looking at a $250,000 fine in my hand had I chosen to call my contact at DHHS and send him a fax. That's all I had to do. Instead, she said, "Oh, you're trying to scare me. There's nothing wrong with my facility. There's nothing wrong that exists here." Well, obviously, if your folks don't know better than to throw away hard copies of the patient census without shredding them first and to put them in the public trash, there is, in fact, something wrong with your facility. And it come to find out that what the owner of these 7 nursing homes has been using for patient privacy training have been free webinars, which, as you know, are not particularly consistent with respect to when they're delivered. So you could have a person join your staff and not get a privacy training for a half dozen months or so. Well, gang, that sort of thing cannot continue. It's the egregious violation that's going to shutter any facility with those massive fines that we talked about just a moment ago, and that cavalier attitude has to stop. Unfortunately, we've been doing these sorts of webinars now, what, Larry, for the last year and a half, and I don't think we've seen a great deal of evidence that that attitude is changing.
No, we've been doing them closer to 2, and it remains the same, Jim.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. It's one of those things that you can lead a horse to water, so to speak, but you can't make him drink. We're trying very hard to make you guys drink, and despite our best efforts, there are still quite a few of you who are not bothering to take a swallow. What can you do to remediate? What can you do to ensure that these business associate challenges aren't going to find you with your hands up in the air in a dire situation? Well, first, you are required by law to provide an annual review and attestation if you have a business associate, and that, of course, requires a risk assessment. The risk assessment is an excellent opportunity for you and your practice to identify deficiencies in your current patient information security processes and develop a plan for their remediation. Now, what you're going to have to do is to visit your business associates because they are a likely area of deficiency. You're going to have to find out what's wrong with their security processes and develop a plan for fixing that as well. So start with the valid business associate agreements that you already have in place. Just pick up the phone and start calling and finding out if your business associates are providing training and what sort of security measures they have in place. Then give them written correction timeframes and stick to them. This is all very simple stuff. It can be done with a series of phone calls and personal visits. It doesn't require an advanced degree or rocket science. It's actually pretty simple. Inspect what you expect. But the bottom point on the screen here is the criticality. Sean Tuma said this last week. I'm going to say it this week. I'm sure Jim Sanford will say it next week. You all will ignore it, and that's fine. If a vendor won't meet challenges, you find another one. If you've got one of those vendors who refuses to sign a BAA because they claim they're a covered entity, find another vendor and don't put it off. Don't wait until next week or next month or next year. Find another vendor now. That sounds easy. I understand that. But the hard truth is that if vendors aren't going to meet your challenges now, they sure aren't going to meet them later, and you're better off without them at the moment and dealing with whatever crises that presents to you and your practice employees. The key, however, is remembering that different security problems all have different priorities. Look for the flagrant or the obvious violations, and then work to indemnify against threats that are outside direct control. Business associates and business associate agreements are all challenges of high importance, but if you haven't taken care of securing your own office network or encrypting the devices that are in your own office, you need to look to those things first, because those are the things that are likely to create a real problem for you with some degree of immediacy. That's not to say that every business associate you have doesn't have a device that your PHI is residing on that is still unencrypted. It is saying that the majority of you have unencrypted devices in your office that you need to look to first. So while these business associates and the BAAs are challenges of high importance, you've got to look to things that are within your control to remediate quickly, and to do that first. Look for the flagrant or obvious violations on your own part and indemnify against those threats that are outside your direct control. The way that you do that, the way that you indemnify against those threats, is having valid, up-to-date business associate agreements. And what we're going to talk about as the final portion of our time together today will really delve into the nitty-gritty, if you will, of how you amend those business associate agreements to ensure that they are in compliance with the Omnibus Rule. Again, the deadline to do that is Monday. Odds are you've got a few that won't meet the deadline. I'm not saying that you're going to get an instant fine on Monday morning, but obviously you need to take some notes here in our last few minutes together and find a way to apply these concepts and these strategies to your existing business associate agreements. Existing BAAs need to comply with the Omnibus Rule. I've made that point several times and given it no real weight. The compliance deadline is next Monday, September 22nd, and as I mentioned, the templates that you can download from the Department of Health and Human Services, the templates that 90% of you are using as your existing contracts with business associates, are not compliant. Now, do not ask me why HHS is leaving up templates that are not compliant, but they ain't. Just take my word for it as a HIPAA professional. Those things that you can go to the HHS website today and download are not going to be compliant come next Monday. And if you have older business associate agreements, I can almost guarantee you that they are not compliant. In total, or in all, there are 8 things that you need to do to change these BAAs. And these are all set forth in the Omnibus Rule. You need to add definitions of high-tech and the Omnibus Rule. That's pretty easy. Just add a couple of paragraphs. You update your usage specifications to ensure that the business associate is also creating, receiving, maintaining, or transmitting, which pretty much covers any involvement they have with your PHI. The business associate has to be contractually required to notify you of any breach within a specific reporting period. And the business associate must be able to account for all ePHI disclosures in the past 3 years. Those 2 points, the BAs will not want to notify you of any breach within a specific reporting period. They've got to. And they've got to be able to account for disclosures over the last 36 months. Again, most of them will not be willing to do that, because they won't know what those disclosures are in the larger cases. Specifically, you have to note that the business associate has specific obligations under high-tech. They've had those obligations now for the last 5 years. Most of them haven't paid a lot of attention to them. The business associate has to agree to abide by self-pay, non-disclosure requirements. In other words, if you have patients in your practice, and most practices do, who are entirely self-pay, and they request you not to disclose their PHI, then your business associate also has to honor that request. And you have to give the BA the right to terminate for violations on your part. Now, this may strike you as something that's pretty odd, but it's required, or going to be come Monday. Give your business associates the right to require that they terminate the agreement if they spot you violating patient privacy. Usually, I will grant you, it's all been one-sided. You've had the right to terminate a BA if you spot a violation by your business associate. This effectively turns the tables, and it gets the business associate off the hook. because they can terminate a BAA if they spot you violating patient privacy in any shape, form, or fashion. Now, the final bullet point is also the most difficult. The business associate must agree to abide by the privacy rule stipulations. They've been required to do that through HITECH now for the last 5 years, but it's never been a contractual item. And guess what? Now it is. So these are the 8 things that your business associates have to take on board. These are the 8 modifications that you have to make to your existing BAAs before Monday if you want to be in full compliance with the statute. Let's go down the list again. You have to add paragraph definitions of HITECH and the Omnibus Rule. You can go online and get paragraph summations of both and add those to your BAAs without any problem. You have to update usage requirements so that it specifies that your business associate creates, receives, maintains, or transmits. That means that if they have anything at all to do with your EPHI, they're going to be a contracted business associate. There's no way off the hook for them by maintaining that they did not create, receive, maintain, or transmit. They've got to do one of the 4. They've got to notify you of any data breach within a specified reporting period. They've got to account for all EPHI disclosures in the past 3 years. And again, most business associates will not want to do either one. If that's the case, if they're stringent about it, if they say, no, we're not signing it, you find somebody else and you do it quickly. Specifically, you have to note that the business associate has obligations under HITECH, under the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health law. The business associate has to agree to abide by self-pay non-disclosure requirements. We've discussed that. If your practice has self-pay patients, then you know your business associate is also going to have to treat their PHI with kid gloves. You're going to have to give the business associate the right to terminate your BAA for violations that you commit. And that's a twist, but it's a necessary one. And the business associate has to agree to abide by privacy rule stipulations. They have to agree to abide by privacy rule law, and that's been something they've been required to do now for the past 5 years, but again, it has not been in most business associate agreements. Now you're going to have to spell it out. So these are the changes in BAAs that are required come Monday, and there's a lot of work to do here on a lot of BAAs, I will grant you. As I said, if you can make most of these changes into the year, I think you're doing really well. A lot of practices we will see still working on these changes come the middle of next year. But again, those good faith efforts, those efforts that you make toward showing that you're trying to comply, will in many cases get you off the hook. We've made this point again and again in webinar series over the last year and a half, and I can tell you that it's literally true. Those practices that still show willful ignorance of patient privacy requirements are going to get slammed, fined, and fined hard when they breach. And you can't say if they breach anymore because it's a 94% probability. So the odds are a data breach is going to happen to you or to a business associate with whom you maintain a BAA. If you can show that you've got your business associate agreements in some state of compliance or in some degree of process working toward this, this sort of a positive, totally compliant framework, then you'll stand a good chance of being able to wiggle off the hook. Otherwise, you're on it. You're going to be, as I said a few moments ago, filleted and fried.
Jim, just one
Larry,
thing.
if we have some specific.
Just one thing I wanted to throw in there. If you know, folks didn't think this was serious enough, that whole discussion about whether or how to identify and define a business associate was going on over the last couple of years, and Google was involved in that, ironically enough, because they were providing, you know, Gmail for business uses and a whole lot of other suite of products to the medical industry. Well, it come to find out that Google now is requiring all medical offices or anyone in the healthcare industry that uses that suite of products for business purposes to sign a business associate agreement. And And Google's position 2 years ago was just the opposite. So if Google has determined through the HHS that they have to have a business associate agreement, I would suspect that anyone else that you deal with is much smaller than Google, and whatever they tell you in terms of their perception on whether they're a business associate or not, you may want to stick to your guns, as Jim said, and make sure that business associate agreement gets signed.
Well, that's the criticality, and yeah, if Google can afford to sustain a $250,000 fine, that's fine. The implication is that you and I probably cannot, and that's certainly taking a leaf out of Google's playbook, but it's sound advice. Larry, do we have any questions? Anybody have a query that I can try to address in our last few minutes here?
Well, one of the questions here is, and I think Jim Sanford probably deal with some of this next week, is how to get the risk assessment and analysis requirement portion done by the privacy officer. What steps do people need to go through to complete that process?
Well, you know, we provide, that's an excellent question, and I did leave that hanging a bit, but we provide a very rudimentary risk assessment template with our privacy officer training. That's just part of the deliverable. But the real intricacies of risk assessment, if you want to check back next Wednesday for Jim Sanford's webinar, he's going to go into it, and I can't think of anybody on the planet who is better at dealing with practice risk assessments than Jim, because that's what they do. That's their focus. That's their sole area of expertise. As a consequence, it is a very involved process. You can find risk assessment templates on the internet without any real degree of difficulty. Trying to get it done right is an art. The typical risk assessment that I do for a solo practitioner or a 1 or 2 practitioner office takes me anywhere from 4 to 6 hours to complete on site. I still do a fair number of risk assessments on the phone, but I always insist now that they provide a webcam view of their office so I can see in very minute detail what's going on. But it's usually almost a full day affair. There's no way to expedite a risk assessment. There's no way to make it a cheap and dirty process. There's no way to make it particularly quick. But if you're having difficulty getting off on the right foot and understanding that risk assessment really is the foot you've got to get off on, be sure and check back for Jim's webinar at noon next Wednesday, because I know that the information that he will provide you is literally solid gold. You can bet that it's going to be worth its weight in effective currency, and it's the ticket, if you will, to conducting a proper and complete risk assessment of your practice.
And just to remind everyone, if you haven't already signed up for the webinar next week, Jim Sanford, who Jim Moore is referring to, is the Vice President of Coalfire Technologies. Coalfire, just so you know, is the largest third-party assessor, government assessor for risk assessments, and Smart Training has put together a program with them to help dental offices, medical offices get through this process, and Jim Sanford's going to be here next week to talk about that and more. So if you haven't signed up for that webinar, it's highly suggested, and we'll be sending out more information after this webinar today. So if you haven't signed up, look at your email, and you'll get something today or tomorrow to sign up for that. Jim, I just wanted to say one other thing, is that I'm sitting here looking at a bit of data from the Identity Theft Resource Center. It comes out twice a year, but it's updated monthly. They've got over 533 breaches that it has basically exposed over 18 to 20 million patient records. And one of the ones that, ironically enough, that's in there is a company called On-Site Health Diagnosis here in Texas, and they were actually the business associate to the state of
This
Tennessee.
is the state of Tennessee folks, yeah.
Yes, and 60,000 records were exposed, and exposed because of a drive that was unencrypted. And just reiterate the safe harbor again for folks that don't understand the importance of encryption. Had that piece of equipment been encrypted, they would not have had to report something like this, but that was not the case.
No, in fact, I talked with Lee Slayton, who heads up our dental sales team, earlier in the week about a client of his that had already spent $200,000 to remediate a data breach that was caused by a backup drive left in the front seat of an employee's car while she went into a convenience store to get a cup of coffee. The drive was stolen while she was gone for 3 minutes. The drive was not encrypted. Had the drive been encrypted, which now I can't speak to Windows, but on a Mac, I'm completely Mac savvy. On a Mac, that's a fairly automatic process. You just click a couple of buttons. Had that drive been encrypted, no breach would have occurred. So the first thing you should have done if you spent the time with Sean Tuma last Wednesday was to check every single drive in your office and make sure that every one of them was encrypted. That's an easy get-out-of-jail-free card that we find more and more practices are ignoring altogether. I have a client, for example, in Dallas, Texas, that uses laptops exclusively with a field force and did not realize that all of those laptops had to be encrypted. So they had, this happened to be government patient data on laptops, 7 or 8 of them out in the field with no encryption. The odds of those getting stolen, as you folks know, is very high, and did not realize they needed to bring all of those back into the office, have a down day for all their staff, and encrypt those laptops. It's not rocket science, folks, but it basically alleviates the concern about a data breach with that particular device. Now, granted, you could still email data to someone and commit a breach, but if that device is stolen, you don't have a breach to report as long as it's encrypted. That's why Sean was so strident on the point last week. That's why I'm mentioning it again, because as I go from office to office, the one thing that I see on a continuing basis is that these devices, and they are numerous now, far more numerous than they were when I got started in this business years ago, these devices are not encrypted, and they need to be. Take some downtime, find a weekend, go in, make sure that everything in your office is encrypted. That's how the largest data breach in United States history actually occurred. Larry, if I can digress for just a second, a nurse working for a Chicago area hospital had a laptop stolen, this was 4 years ago, exposing 530-odd patient records. The hospital paid a fine and put into place an encryption program which was obviously achingly slow because it did not reach computers sitting on desks in other offices that the hospital maintained in the Chicago area. Someone stole 4 of those computers, exposed several million patient names in the process. Those computers had never been encrypted, despite the fact that that covered entity had agreed with Health and Human Services to institute an encryption program. Their excuse was that the encryption program had not yet reached those computers. After 4 years, you have to wonder how long an encryption program is meant to take. You can't dilly-dally around. You can't say, oh, we'll get to it when my IT person comes back. This is something that you've got to address today. If you don't, all of our best measures to remediate or remove threats or penalties literally fly out the window because you've effectively exposed yourself and your practice to massive liability by failing to take even that first remediation step, encrypting every single device in your office. Larry, any other questions that I can try to address? I'll climb down off my soapbox and do the best I can.
No, Jim, I think you've covered quite a bit today, and once again, I would reiterate, if you did not hear Sean Tuma, cybersecurity data breach attorney from last week, and think that, hey, I only have a few files, less than 500 or what have you, he made it pretty apparent that these hackers can get upwards of $500 or $1,000 a piece for a patient record that has Social Security, name, address, and phone number on them. So, you know, it doesn't take too long for the data breach or lost thumb drive to add up and be incentive for these folks to try to get into your system. So do take it seriously. And Jim, I think that'll be about it for today. I appreciate your time, and you can wrap it up. I'll let you wrap it up.
Okay, Larry, and again, thanks. By the way, I do know for a fact that the going rate for a hard copy patient chart, all those manila charts that you have in your office, on the streets of Brooklyn today, the going rate for a chart is $100. Now, you can imagine that the several $100 figures that Sean talked about last week are certainly accurate with respect to EPHI. So you've got a commodity in your office that is well worth protecting, and we at Smart Training are going out of our way to ensure that you adopt that attitude, that mindset, and that you take those steps necessary to be proactively protective of your patients' privacy and data. That just about wraps it from the Smart Training corner of the world. For producer extraordinaire Larry Lewis, I'm Jim Moore. My email address is at the top of the screen. If you've got some questions about your business associates or existing BAAs, feel free to drop me an email. I will answer as best I can. You'll forgive me if my answer tends to be pointed. That's the nature of my personality these days. We don't have a lot of time to play around with being nice with business associates who are not going to comply with the privacy and security rules, and as a consequence, I'm taking a kind of a hard-nosed attitude toward business associates and their agreements in this day and age. Again, thanks for your time and attention. Remember, make your day count and be sure to work safe. We'll see you soon, folks.